Hello, magnificent human beings. My name is Landon. Welcome to Yoga New Mexico, where we focus on empowerment, alignment, and strength. You are in the right place, capable and strong. So it's Wednesday. It is time for our short educational piece. We're going to break down Warrior 1 and look at that in some more detail. So if you want to know how to do Warrior 1, go ahead, stay tuned, because that is coming up right now. Roll out your mat, and I will roll the intro screen. I think it's good to start off by saying that Warrior 1 and Crescent lunges are two different things. Now, this might cause, some discord amongst various yogis because some would say they're kind of one and the same. And yes, they are similar postures, and I think really what it comes down to is semantics. Some might call Warrior 1 Crescent Lunge, vice versa. And so it really depends on actually what type of yoga you do and what lineage you've studied. And there's a lot of variables. But in this case here on my channel, Crescent Lunge is one thing and Warrior 1 is another thing. And I like to keep these separate because in my mind they are two separate poses, but when you try to do a weird hybrid of the postures, you actually can invite injury into your practice, which is something we do not want. So let's go ahead and look specifically at Warrior 1. And I think a lot of the issues come from how you get into the posture, because if you're flowing through your practice, say in a vinyasa or something, then sometimes things happen kind of quick and you can't really feel how things are supposed to be. So we're going to hang out in the pose for a little bit today and make sure we have everything right. So assuming you're in your downward facing dog, you would take your right foot, bring it on up. And I think a common misconception is that you just ground down your back heel and then raise on up into Warrior 1. And so this is kind of a weird hybrid of Crescent Lunge, Warrior 2, and Warrior 1. Most people aren't really flexible, myself included, to be able to take a normal Crescent Lunge position, ground down that heel, and keep your hips square and come on up because, well, I mean, just look at it. It looks terrible. So really the secret is you leave your hands on the mat and then you just bring your back foot up some so you can ground down that foot. So hands on the mat, this foot, step it up so you can ground that heel down. Then you can come on up into your Warrior 1. And you'll notice Warrior 1, here are the basic alignment cues I think you hear a lot. So hips square with the front, and then this knee still stacked perfectly on top of that ankle, and that back heel grounded down. And all these are excellent cues because oftentimes in a yoga class, the instructor doesn't have enough time to really give you every little single cue. So those are kind of the biggest ones to help prevent injury. Another one, though, that's not really talked about is when you square your hips, you don't want to torque your back knee. So if you have this back foot kind of spaced out a lot, then when you come up and you square your hips, you're going to put a lot of strain on that back knee, and it does not feel good. So point your toes towards the top of the mat more than you think you need to. So your feet should not be perfectly straight and in one line, but instead relatively straight. So it's actually, some would say a 45-degree angle, but I even think that's too much. It should be kind of in between 45 and straight on, if you will. So you can really ground down that heel, and you can come into your warrior one. And we'll get to what we do with our hands here in a second. If you notice, if you look at my heels, they're not really in one line. And that is a good thing because I don't believe that your heels should be in one line in warrior one. Warrior two, that's a different story, and we'll get there at a later time. But warrior one, if your hips are square with the front, then you have the space that we always talk about, put two fists in between your feet to measure hips distance. Well, you still want your hips more or less hips distance. So if you notice, in my warrior one, my heels aren't perfectly in one line. They are off by just a little bit. Now, you're going to feel a big difference if you move it in one line because it kind of starts to, I think, mess with your ankle a little bit. And if you have way too far off, then you're not really balanced as you should be. So those are the first two tips. One is step that, well, I guess that's 3 now, right? Your back foot, step it up enough so you can ground down that heel, which leads you into the next tip. Ground down that heel comfortably because you don't want to torque that knee. So you're here in the base of your lunge, but then when you come into warrior one, step it up a little bit, ground down that heel, and if you come up and things still feel weird, scooch it on up a little bit. Your warrior one might be right here, and that is totally fine. So then the next tip is don't have your heels in one line. They do want to be separated just a little bit. After this, your arms, bring them on up. Warrior one. And you'll hear lots of different lineages talk about you should interlace your fingers or bring them in prayer position or arc back. There's lots of variants here, but for the most part, arms are up. And if you want to interlace your fingers or bring your hands together, that's fine. So leaving your hands on up, this is a good solid warrior one. The last tip that I'll give you is something that will, I think, really kind of kick it up a notch, if you will. When you're in your warrior one, there's real subtle things you can do with your hips and how you tilt your torso. So here we are in our warrior one, placing your hands on your hips, so it's just a good reminder to keep your hips square with the front. Okay, so checking your alignment. Looks pretty good. Then your hands are up overhead, and there's a few subtle things you can do. So to kind of illustrate this, first is you should very, very slightly engage your pelvic floor. I'm talking like 5 or 10% of your strength. And what this will do is kind of tilt that pelvis forward just a tiny, tiny bit. So you're here in your warrior one, and you engage that pelvic floor. So it's very subtle, but you can kind of see what happens. So from here to here. And it's just a really small, subtle change. But you do that, and you position yourself better to tilt that torso back. So engage that pelvic floor, then hinging at your hips, you're just tilting that torso towards the back of the mat. So you don't collapse into your low back, you actually lengthen up and out and tilt on back. And what this will do is you will get this left side of your body will just light on fire because you're going to feel it in this front hip flexor, you're going to feel it all the way down into that calf as you come back. So holding strong and then coming back just a little bit. You don't want to come into a back bend. I mean, you will see lots of warrior ones where people do kind of come way back into a back bend, and that's fine. But that's kind of getting into a little bit of a different pose or a huge amplification of it. We just want the little tricks that will really help you find that posture, Because if you're not in it for very long, you want to do as many quick little things as you can to feel it, take 2 or 3 breaths, and then come into the next posture. So that's pretty much it for Warrior 1. I'm just going to go through everything real quick again, because I know there's lots of little steps involved. So you take that foot, bring it through. This back foot, step it up so you can ground down that heel comfortably. Again, you might even have to bring it up just a little bit more. Notice how this toe is pointed up towards that kind of top left corner of your mat. And bring your hands on up onto your hips. Hips are square. This knee on top of that ankle. Heel grounds down. And your heels, both of them, are off by just a little bit. They're not really in one line. And gently engage that pelvic floor. Again, like if you can engage and use your strength by 100%, you're using way too much. 5 or 10%, just a tiny bit to kind of tilt that pelvis forward a tiny bit. And then you lengthen through that torso and hinge on back a tiny bit, opening up that front body, feeling it back in your calf. Hands come on up, lengthening. Relax your shoulders down and just breathe. Awesome job. So again, lots of stuff going on in Warrior 1. Stay tuned for Friday's episode. We're going to do these terms, right? Warrior 2, Warrior 1. Warrior 1 is the theme, and we're going to explore that even more in Friday's class. We're going to do Warrior 1. We're going to do Humble Warrior. And then we actually will do some other warriors. There's so much warrior going on that, well, there's enough for everybody. So thank you so much for being here. As always, you are an amazing human being. You are in the right place, capable and strong. From my heart to yours, namaste.